Let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. When was the last time you sat in a room, completely alone, with no phone, no music, no television, no notifications, just you and your own thoughts, and you didn't reach for something to fill the silence? Think about that honestly, because most of you, if you're being real with yourself, cannot remember the last time that happened. And that silence you've been running from, that discomfort you feel the moment the noise disappears, that is not weakness. That is a signal that tells you exactly where your next level of growth is hiding. It's hiding in the one place you've been afraid to go, inside yourself. I'm not here today to give you another motivational speech that makes you feel good for 20 minutes and then fades before you reach the parking lot. I'm here to tell you something that took me years to understand. Something that the most successful, most fulfilled, most grounded people in the world quietly practice every single day, but rarely talk about. And that thing is this: intentional solitude is not a punishment. It is not a consequence. It is not something that happens to you when life goes wrong. It is a discipline, a strategy, a weapon, and the people who master it, the people who learn to spend time alone with purpose and intention, those are the people who ultimately build lives that cannot be taken from them. So stay with me today, because what I'm about to share with you has the power to change not just how you think, but who you become. Let's start with a truth that nobody likes to say out loud. Most people are terrified of being alone, not because solitude is actually painful, but because when the noise disappears, when the distractions stop, when the screen goes dark, when the music cuts off, they are suddenly forced to meet the one person they have been avoiding their entire life, themselves. And many people spend decades, entire lifetimes, running from that meeting. They stay busy so they don't have to think. They stay distracted so they don't have to feel. They stay surrounded by noise so they never have to listen to the voice inside them that quietly asks, "Is this really the life I'm supposed to be living?" That question scares people, and so they reach for their phone. They scroll for another hour. They turn on another show. They accept another invitation they didn't really want to go to. Anything at all, to avoid sitting alone with that question. But here's what I want you to understand today. That question is not your enemy. That question is your compass. And until you create enough silence to hear it clearly, you will spend years, maybe the best years of your life, walking in someone else's direction, chasing someone else's definition of success, living inside a version of your life that was designed by other people's expectations, other people's opinions, other people's timelines. And one day you will wake up and look around at everything you've built, everything you've achieved, everyone you've impressed, and you will feel something that no amount of applause can fix. Empty, because somewhere in the noise you lost yourself, and intentional solitude is the road that brings you back. I want to tell you about a man I met years ago who permanently shifted the way I think about success. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. Not at the time I met him. He didn't have a massive platform or a large following. He didn't drive an impressive car or wear impressive clothes. In fact, if you passed him on the street, you would never look twice. But there was something about him that was different from almost everyone else I had ever encountered. There was a calmness to him, a certainty, a groundedness that didn't depend on anything outside of himself. He wasn't rattled by opinion. He wasn't chasing validation. He didn't need the room to agree with him to feel confident in what he believed. I had to understand where that came from, so I watched him for a while. And what I discovered was this. Every single morning, without exception, this man woke up before 5 o'clock, put on an old jacket, and walked alone for nearly an hour. No music, no podcast, no phone, no earbuds, just him, the morning air, and his own thoughts. One day I asked him about it. I said, "Why do you do that? Why do you walk alone every morning?" He smiled. Not the smile of someone who wants to impress you, but the smile of someone who has discovered something real. And he said, "Because if I don't spend time leading myself, I'll spend the rest of the day being led by everyone else." Read that sentence again in your mind. Let it land. If I don't spend time leading myself, I'll spend the rest of the day being led by everyone else. That's what's happening to most people every single day. They wake up and immediately hand the wheel over to the world. The first thing they see is someone else's post. The first thing they hear is someone else's opinion. The first thing they feel is someone else's agenda trying to capture their attention. And from that first moment, they're reacting to notifications, to news, to noise, to the endless demands of everyone else's priorities. And they wonder why, by the end of the day, they feel exhausted without having made meaningful progress on anything that actually matters to them. It's because they never drove. They were a passenger all day long. Intentional solitude changes that. It gives you back the wheel before the world tries to take it. Now, I need to make a critical distinction, one that most people completely miss. There is a massive difference between loneliness and solitude, and confusing the two is one of the most dangerous mistakes you can make. Loneliness is a condition. Solitude is a choice. Loneliness says, nobody is with me. Solitude says, now I finally have time to become who I was meant to be. Loneliness drains you. Solitude develops you. Loneliness is what happens when you have no connection, not even to yourself. Solitude is what happens when you intentionally disconnect from the external world so you can reconnect with the internal one. You can walk into a crowded room and feel completely alone. That's loneliness. You can sit in an empty house at 5 in the morning in absolute silence and feel completely whole. That's solitude. And the difference between those two experiences is not the number of people around you. The difference is whether or not you have learned to be present with yourself. Isolation weakens you. Solitude strengthens you. Isolation is escaping people. Solitude is discovering yourself. Isolation is rooted in fear. Solitude is rooted in growth. And the world needs you to understand that distinction, because the moment you do, you stop seeing time alone as something to endure, and you start seeing it as something to pursue, because that's where the real work happens. Think about every great transformation story you've ever heard. The athlete who becomes a champion isn't training in front of a crowd at noon. They're in the gym at 4 in the morning, alone, when nobody is watching and nobody is applauding. The entrepreneur who builds something remarkable isn't doing it when everything is going perfectly. They're working through the night after everyone else has gone to sleep, pushing through doubt and uncertainty in the quiet hours when no one sees them. The writer who produces a book that changes lives isn't writing it on a stage. They're sitting in an empty room, alone with their thoughts, turning invisible ideas into visible words, chapter after chapter after chapter, before anyone reads a single page. The visionary who eventually transforms an industry spends years developing ideas in private before the world ever notices they exist. Here is a pattern so consistent and so undeniable that you cannot ignore it. Growth happens in private before it becomes visible in public. The roots grow long before the tree rises. The foundation is laid long before the building stands. The preparation happens in darkness long before the light arrives. And yet, modern culture has taught us to be terrified of that private season. It has taught us to fear silence. It has conditioned us to believe that if something isn't visible, it doesn't count. That if something isn't shared, it didn't happen. That if nobody is watching, there is no point in doing it. So the moment we are alone, we reach for a screen. The moment we feel uncomfortable, we seek distraction. The moment uncertainty appears, we search for entertainment. We scroll, we stream, we binge, we consume. Anything, absolutely anything, to avoid being alone with our own thoughts. But I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly. What if the answers you have been searching for your entire life are hiding inside the very silence you've been running from? What if your next breakthrough is waiting in solitude? What if the next level of your life requires separation? What if your future is asking you to stop reacting for 5 minutes and start reflecting? Because that's exactly what I believe is happening for most people in this room right now. Here's something that nobody warns you about. The world is constantly trying to tell you who you should be. Social media has an opinion about your body, your lifestyle, your choices, your values. Your friends have opinions about what career you should pursue. Your family has opinions about who you should marry and when. Your coworkers have opinions about your ambitions. Strangers on the internet have opinions about things they've never seen and experiences they'll never understand. And the noise never stops. It's constant. It's relentless. It comes at you from every direction, every device, every moment of the day. The result? Most people never create enough silence to hear their own voice. And when you never hear your own voice, when you're constantly absorbing and reacting to everyone else's noise, something dangerous starts happening. You begin building a life that doesn't belong to you. You chase goals you don't actually want. You impress people you don't actually respect. You buy things you don't actually need. You perform a version of yourself that the crowd approves of, while the real you quietly suffocates underneath it all. You become successful by other people's standards while feeling like a failure by your own. And that is not success. That is a sophisticated form of being lost. The path back is simple, but not easy. You have to create enough silence to hear yourself again. You have to be willing to sit alone, without the approval, without the applause, without the validation, and ask, what do I actually want? What do I actually believe? What kind of person do I actually want to become? And that conversation, the one that only happens in solitude, that is where your real life begins. I heard a story once about a young woman that I've never forgotten. She worked a regular job, nothing extraordinary, average income, average circumstances, average opportunities, at least on the surface. But she had one habit that set her apart from almost everyone around her. Every single evening after work, while her friends were out, while her social media was buzzing, while the television was calling her name, she spent 2 hours alone, learning. No recognition, no applause, no audience, just her and the skill she was building, day after day, week after week, month after month. At first, nothing seemed to change. The compound effect doesn't announce itself in the early stages. It doesn't give you a preview. It just quietly builds, invisible to everyone, including sometimes yourself. But the compound effect is one of the most powerful forces in the universe, and it doesn't care whether you're famous or unknown. It doesn't care about your background or your starting point. It doesn't care about your circumstances or your connections. It only cares about one thing: what you repeatedly do. Small actions, repeated consistently, create extraordinary outcomes. And solitude creates the environment where those small actions can happen. Free from the noise, free from the distraction, free from the constant pull of other people's attention. Years passed, and that woman changed careers, then doubled her income, then started helping others create the same transformation in their lives. People looked at her results and called her lucky. They never saw the lonely evenings. They never saw the sacrifices. They never saw the silent investment. They saw the harvest. They never saw the planting. And that is exactly how success works. The world celebrates public victories, but every public victory was born in a private season of preparation. Your private season matters. Your invisible work matters. Your quiet moments of discipline, when nobody is watching and nobody is applauding, are not lost. They are being compounded, and one day, perhaps sooner than you think, the world will see the results of what you built in private, and they will call it overnight success. They will be wrong, but you will know the truth. Let me talk to you now about something that most people completely overlook. Intentional solitude doesn't just improve your performance, it improves your judgment. Think about what happens to your thinking when you are constantly surrounded by noise and input and stimulation. Your thoughts become borrowed. You absorb other people's opinions without examining them. You start reacting instead of reflecting. You become emotionally swept along by whatever is loudest, most viral, most urgent. And in that state, you make decisions that belong to other people. You say yes when you mean no. You pursue things you never actually wanted. You avoid things that could transform your life because someone else decided they were risky. You live according to a set of standards that you never consciously chose. But solitude creates clarity, and clarity creates power. Think about a glass of muddy water. If you shake it constantly, it stays cloudy. You can't see through it. You can't see what's inside it. But if you leave it still, perfectly still, long enough, everything settles. The water becomes clear, and now you can see exactly what's there. Your mind works the same way. Most people don't need more information. They need more reflection. They don't need another article, another podcast, another strategy. They need enough silence to process what they've already learned. They need enough stillness to recognize the answer that's already inside them, the one they haven't been able to hear because the noise never stopped long enough to let it surface. Wisdom whispers, and whispers cannot be heard in crowded rooms. A simple walk, no agenda, no destination, no device, can produce more genuine insight than hours of anxious information consumption. Something remarkable happens when the body moves and the mind becomes quiet. Problems become clearer. Solutions emerge. Emotions settle. Perspective returns. The things that felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. The things that seemed impossibly complicated begin to reveal their answers, because you finally gave your mind the space to work. Now I want to address something that people rarely talk about when it comes to solitude. Some levels of growth require temporary separation, not because other people are bad, not because relationships don't matter. They absolutely do, but because the environment you inhabit shapes who you become. And sometimes the environment you're currently in is designed, often unintentionally, to keep you exactly where you are. Some people in your life constantly feed your doubts without realizing it. Some people reinforce your limitations without meaning to. Some people People who genuinely love you unintentionally keep you attached to an old version of yourself because that's the version they know, and change makes them uncomfortable. And so they question your ambitions. They rationalize your hesitation. They remind you of your failures. They celebrate when you stay the same and quietly resist when you try to grow. And the longer you stay in that environment without any counterbalance, the harder it becomes to hear your own vision above the noise of their caution. There comes a moment in every person's growth journey when they need space, not to abandon the people they love, not to become arrogant or isolated or selfish, but to create enough distance from the noise of other people's opinions to finally hear their own voice clearly enough to follow it. The courage to spend time alone, to sit with your own thoughts without needing someone else to validate them, that courage is rarer than most people realize. And it is more valuable than almost any skill you could develop, because it is the foundation of self-determination. And self-determination is the foundation of everything else. I want to tell you about a man who taught me one of the most important lessons about personal change I have ever learned. This man felt trapped, not by circumstances that were dramatically terrible, just by the gray, suffocating sameness of a life going nowhere. Wake up, work, complain, sleep, repeat. The days looked the same. The weeks blurred together. The years passed, and nothing changed. Until one day, he made a decision so simple, it almost seems too small to matter. Every morning, he would spend 30 minutes alone, thinking about his future. Not planning, not journaling, not reading a book or listening to a podcast. Just thinking, sitting quietly with his own thoughts, and asking himself honest questions about where he was headed. At first, nothing happened. 30 minutes of silence produced nothing but discomfort and the urge to pick up his phone. But he stayed with it. Then ideas began to emerge. Small ones at first, then bigger ones. He started writing them down. Then he started setting goals around them. Then he started noticing opportunities he had been walking past for years without seeing. Then he started taking action, small action, then larger action. And then his entire life began to shift. Not because his circumstances magically changed, not because someone rescued him, not because luck finally arrived, but because his thinking changed. And when your thinking changes, your decisions change. When your decisions change, your actions change. When your actions change, your future changes. That's the sequence, every time, without exception. And solitude gave him access to the first step, his own thinking. Most people are desperately trying to change their results without ever addressing the source of their results, which is the quality of their thinking. But you cannot produce a different outcome from the same thought process. You cannot build a new life from an old mindset. You cannot reach a new destination using the same map that brought you to where you currently are. You have to change the thinking first. Everything else follows. And changing your thinking requires time alone with your thoughts. There is no shortcut. There is no app. There is no formula. Just you and the honest, uncomfortable, transformative practice of sitting with yourself long enough to begin seeing clearly. Let me tell you something that changed my life. Pain is inevitable, but suffering from unnecessary regret is optional. Every person in this room will experience pain. Failure will visit your life. Loss will visit your life. Disappointment will find you no matter how carefully you plan, no matter how hard you work, no matter how many precautions you take. That is not pessimism. That is the honest reality of being human. But regret, that's different. Regret is not pain that found you. Regret is the pain you create by choosing the safe road over the right road, the comfortable path over the meaningful one. Regret is the cost of the dreams you didn't chase, the risks you didn't take, the person you didn't become because you were waiting for perfect conditions that never arrived. And the tragedy of regret is that it compounds exactly the way discipline does, silently, invisibly, over years, until one day you look back and the distance between who you are and who you could have been is so vast that it takes your breath away. Intentional solitude helps you confront the potential for that regret before it becomes permanent, because when you're alone long enough, the excuses get harder to believe. The stories you tell yourself begin to unravel. The patterns you've been blind to suddenly become visible. You begin to hear yourself clearly, and sometimes what you hear is uncomfortable. You hear how often you've blamed circumstances for the life you've created. You hear how many times you've blamed timing, blamed other people, blamed bad luck, when the real obstacle was something you had the power to change. And then one day, in the quiet, a difficult truth arrives. Not a cruel truth, a liberating one. Personal responsibility is not a burden. It is the ultimate superpower. Because the moment you accept responsibility for where your life is, you gain the power to change where it's going. The moment you stop waiting for circumstances to improve, you start improving yourself. The moment you stop blaming, you start building. And builders create futures. Blamers create explanations. That decision, that fundamental shift from victim to architect, it rarely happens in the middle of a crowd. It happens alone, in silence, in solitude, when the noise is finally quiet enough that the truth can be heard. I want to talk to you now about the deep connection between solitude and confidence. Most people believe that confidence comes from being validated by other people, from being liked, being praised, being accepted, and so they spend enormous energy seeking that validation, posting and performing and presenting curated versions of themselves, always measuring their worth by how much approval they receive. But here's the truth that nobody tells you. That kind of confidence is a house of cards. The moment the approval disappears, the moment the likes drop, the moment the crowd moves on, the moment the criticism arrives, the confidence collapses with it. Because it was never really yours. It was borrowed. It was conditional. It depended entirely on factors outside of your control. Real confidence, the kind that doesn't collapse under pressure, is built differently. It's built promise by promise. Every commitment you make to yourself and actually keep creates confidence. Every time you say you're going to do something and you do it, even when nobody is watching, even when no reward is immediate, even when nothing about it is glamorous, you make a deposit into an account called self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of genuine confidence. You don't build it by being applauded. You build it by honoring yourself when nobody is applauding. You don't build it by receiving praise. You build it by doing the work when no praise is coming. And where do those decisions happen? Where is that character built? In solitude, when nobody sees you, when nobody records you, when nobody celebrates you. In those private moments, the early morning, the late night, the empty room, the quiet walk, you are writing the autobiography of your character. You are deciding, one choice at a time, who you actually are. Character is what you do repeatedly when nobody is watching, and it is the most powerful predictor of what your life will eventually become. I want to talk to you now about the bamboo tree. When you plant a bamboo tree and give it water, you see almost nothing happen for the first year. You continue watering, still nothing. Second year, nothing. Third year, nothing visible. Fourth year, still nothing above the surface. 5 years of daily investment and nothing to show the world. And then, in the 5th year, the bamboo tree can grow up to 90 feet in 6 weeks. 90 feet, 6 weeks. People who only saw that growth would call it sudden. They would call it miraculous. They would call it extraordinary, but it wasn't sudden. It wasn't miraculous. For 5 years, unseen beneath the surface, the bamboo was building a root system massive enough to support extraordinary growth. The roots were developing. The foundation was being established. The invisible work was being done. And then, when the roots were ready, the growth was unstoppable. Your life may be in one of those seasons right now. A season where it looks like nothing is happening. A season where the investment feels unrewarded. A season where progress seems invisible and the effort seems pointless. A season where you're surrounded by people who seem to be advancing while you feel like you're standing still. Let me tell you something that I need you to hear with every part of yourself. The roots matter. The invisible work matters. The quiet, consistent, unglamorous discipline you practice in solitude, when nobody is watching, when nobody is applauding, when nobody is even aware. That work is building the root system of your future. And when the time comes, when the conditions align, when the preparation meets the opportunity, the growth will be extraordinary. But only if you did the root work. Only if you were faithful in the private season. Only if you trusted the process even when there was nothing visible to prove it was working. That is the test of a person who will eventually achieve something remarkable. Can you keep doing the work when there is no evidence that the work is working? The answer to that question is what separates the people who eventually achieve extraordinary things from the people who always almost did. Let me tell you about the most dangerous form of failure that almost nobody talks about. It is not bankruptcy. It is not rejection. It is not public embarrassment. The most dangerous form of failure is this: losing yourself while trying to be accepted. I've seen it happen more times than I can count. Intelligent, gifted, genuinely remarkable people who slowly, over months and years, erode their own identity, trying to fit inside a version of themselves that other people are comfortable with. They change their opinions to avoid conflict. They abandon their dreams to escape criticism. They shrink their ambitions to make insecure people around them feel better. They laugh at what everyone laughs at, agree with what everyone agrees with, follow where everyone follows. And for a while, it works. The group accepts them. The crowd includes them. The social performance succeeds. But there is a price, and it is the highest price a human being can pay. They no longer know who they are. They have become a collection of other people's expectations, a mirror reflecting the preferences of everyone around them, with no sense of their own reflection underneath. And one day, the performance becomes exhausting. The emptiness becomes unbearable, and they find themselves sitting alone, maybe for the first time in years, wondering, who am I actually? What do I actually believe? What do I actually want? And the work begins, the slow, quiet, uncomfortable, essential work of rebuilding your own identity. It begins in solitude. And when it happens, when you finally strip away all the performance and the pretense and the presentation, when you sit with yourself honestly enough to rediscover your own convictions, something extraordinary happens. Your confidence becomes unshakable, not because more people approve of you, not because your life becomes easier, but because you are finally aligned with your values, aligned with your purpose, aligned with who you actually are. And alignment is more powerful than approval. Alignment lasts, approval evaporates. I want to leave you with this. Picture yourself 10 years from today, 10 years older, 10 years wiser, 10 years beyond this very moment. Imagine standing face to face with the person you became over those 10 years. Now understand this, that person is not a fantasy. That person is not a coincidence. That person is not luck or fate or circumstance. That person is being built right now, today, in this moment and every moment that follows. With every decision you make, every habit you keep, every excuse you accept, every discipline you practice. The person you will be in 10 years is the sum total of what you choose to do between now and then. And imagine that future version of you looking you in the eyes. What will they say? Will they thank you? Will they thank you for having the courage to walk alone when the crowd said follow? Will they thank you for believing in yourself when the evidence was scarce? Will they thank you for choosing discipline on the mornings when comfort was screaming louder? Will they thank you for the walks you took alone, the quiet investments you made, the private disciplines you honored when nobody was watching? Or will they ask the question that echoes through the hearts of millions of people who waited too long? What happened? What happened to the dream? What happened to the goal? What happened to the promise you made to yourself on the day you realized what you were capable of? What happened to the person you said you were going to become? That question is the heaviest weight a human heart can carry, and it arrives not at a dramatic moment, not at a failure or a crisis, but quietly, in ordinary moments, when you catch a glimpse in the mirror and barely recognize the person looking back. I don't want that for you. And I don't believe you want it for yourself. So I'm asking you, not as motivation, not as a speech point, but as one human being to another, make a decision today, not tomorrow, not after the holidays, not when your life gets less complicated, not when the timing is better. Today, a decision that your future self will thank you for. A decision to stop letting the world lead you and start leading yourself. A decision to stop filling every silence and start listening to what the silence is trying to tell you. A decision to stop measuring your worth by other people's applause and start measuring your life by the only metric that actually matters, your own growth. You do not need to be extraordinary today. You only need to be intentional. One honest hour alone with your thoughts. One decision that belongs to you and nobody else. One commitment made and kept. One walk taken in the quiet morning before the world has a chance to claim your attention. One small choice in the direction of the person you're capable of becoming. Because here is the final truth I want to leave with you today. Greatness is not built in a single breakthrough. Greatness is built in ordinary moments, thousands of them. When a person decides that who they are becoming matters more than whether anyone is watching. In those moments, in the quiet, in the solitude, in the space between who you are and who you could be, that is where your real life is waiting. And it has been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. The moment you decide to show up for yourself. Start today. Start now. The strongest version of you is not somewhere in the future, hoping you'll eventually arrive. That version of you is inside you right now, waiting for you to stop running from the silence long enough to finally hear it. Walk alone, think deeply, grow quietly, And never again underestimate what becomes possible when an ordinary person makes the extraordinary decision to become the very best version of themselves, one intentional moment at a time. Thank you.